Who in the room likes to wait? Who likes to wait? Evan, you like to wait? Yeah, I didn't think so. You know, there's actually studies that show, and this is fascinating to me, because we don't like to wait, do we? There's studies that show that 37 billion hours a year are spent by Americans waiting in line. Same study. Commuters, those who travel for work, spend in a year 42 hours stuck in traffic. Not the commute, stuck in traffic. There's other studies that are done by marketers, and they show this, that waiting leads to customer dissatisfaction. Do you not feel that when you have to wait? And that customer dissatisfaction actually affects mood. I know you guys are not grumpy when you wait, right? Y'all with me? Feels a little like dreary morning. But that waiting ends up affecting mood, not just customer dissatisfaction, but mood. And then the marketers say that that mood ends up leading to negative word-of-mouth advertising for them. Is anybody feeling that? Actually, a different study, they actually studied 28,000 persons and put them in a scenario of waiting, and the study showed that your mood declines or goes negative 2% for every minute you have to wait. We don't like to wait. I had a great example of it yesterday. My grandson, Knox, has soccer, and we went to see his soccer game. Well, he has siblings too. Naomi is 6, and Ambrose is 4, and then they have twin baby girls that are 1 year old. And so we were at the game watching Knox play, and while we were there, Naomi came and she forgot she didn't bring shoes, and that field out there had those little sticky things, didn't it? That hurt your feet. So ended up carrying her over to the blanket, and then actually played a game where Naomi would put her feet on my feet, and we would kind of walk with her. Y'all ever done that with a kid? It's just fun. So we're doing that. Now, earlier, before we played the game, Ambrose, who's 4, had run over, and I had scooped him up. He said, hey, and when I scooped him up, of course, I turned him upside down, like Simon likes and stuff, and just hung like that. He loved it. So then he goes off and does his thing. Naomi and I are playing the game, and Ambrose comes charging over, and he says, Pop, would you please hold me upside down? And I said, just a minute. What do you imagine was Ambrose's response to me saying, just a minute? He sat on the blanket. He didn't go ballistic. We're glad for that. He sat on the blanket, he put his head down, and he just kind of pouted. And it was only about 1 more minute. But that 1 minute for Ambrose led to misery for him. So we don't like to wait. But the fact is this, in real life, in your life and in my life, we may not like to wait, but we have to wait. And many of us have things we're waiting for that are really troubling. Maybe you have been in a position, just imagine several things, a career breakthrough. You're just ready to move on to the next thing. You need that promotion. You've done this and you're set and you're ready and you want to move forward. Or we all know there's a lot of times when it comes to relationships, waiting for a spouse. That is hard. Or how about this? How about if I expressed love to you and then I get nothing in return so far as either acknowledgement of it or love returned back to me? That waiting is difficult. How about physical sickness? We have some that are in our body that have not just momentary sickness, but they have chronic sickness. But let's boil it back down to even a cold or the flu. Man, if you have 2 weeks of a cold, it feels like eternity. We can go beyond physical sickness. How about mental and emotional sickness? We want healing, and it just does not come fast. Oftentimes, too, and I hate to use the word tritely, but there's enemies in our life. Sometimes those enemies are coworkers. Sometimes it's family members. Sometimes those enemies are neighbors or their schoolmates or their competitors in business. And or sometimes there's just a person out there who doesn't like you for some reason. And we just want them to back off. We want them removed. And waiting for that to happen is difficult. Or how about this? If you're and I think I'm going to say this right, a Torontonian waiting for the Leafs to get out of the first round, or they got out of the first round last year, but waiting for them to get to the conference finals. How long? Difficult. Now, those things are life, but waiting spiritually is difficult too. How many of you, when you trusted Jesus, were ready to be a mature believer like that? Or how many of you felt called or gifted to serve the Lord in a certain area, and yet there's not a platform for that right now? And you have to wait. Or how about, even worse, having a hope that you're waiting on without a clear view of getting there? What if you're a church community who loves the Lord and you are actually wanting to make a difference, but you're waiting? What if you have confessed your sin to someone and forgiveness doesn't come right away? It's hard, isn't it? You want it now. Or you just sometimes, when you're struggling with things like doubts and insecurities and questions, you want peace in your soul, but it just doesn't come quickly. I hope that what we're seeing over these past weeks and even today is this. The Psalms are all about waiting for the right to undo what is wrong. The Psalms are about waiting and about the struggle that's in the wait. Not just the problem and not just the solution, but that in-between struggle. There's a rhythm in the Psalms as you read them. We've already been seeing this. There's usually this. There's an overarching truth that is held to and maintained. There's a God who is. He is over all. He is just and He is good, and He loves you unconditionally. He promises that He will make all things right through the Messiah and through those and for those who follow His way. But then the Psalms don't leave us with just theory. They bring us into present disconnect. You live this, do you not? Not everything in life is fixed. Sometimes wrong seems to carry the day. It seems to win. Wrong seems to have all of the blessing. There's promises there, but somehow they just feel unreal or far away, or like those promises that are made, somehow they're not for me. We have seen in the Psalms that real life should evoke real conversations. It's why we've called this series Praying with the Psalms. And those real conversations actually lead you to a real relationship. You're having to come up against the God who says He loves you with the conflict that you feel. And as you do, relationship is built. And it's out of that real rescue, real hope, real refuge, real security comes. Real life leads to real conversation, leads to real relationship, leads to real rescue. So we've seen it so far in what we've looked at in the Psalms. We looked at Psalm 1 and 2 the first week, and we saw the plan, didn't we? That God has a way, and those who are in His way, He's given that instruction in His Word. Those who are in His way are blessed. But not only that, those who rise up against His way, there's an anointed one. There's a Messiah in chapter 2 who's going to come and set all things right. And if you find refuge in Him, you're blessed. That's the overarching truth. But then Psalm 3 is like a gut punch. Bam! Here you go. My present existential life is disconnected from that promise. There's a contradiction, and it's a psalm of David in Psalm 3, who is the anointed king, kind of mirroring some of what you saw in Psalm 2, and yet his own son, Absalom, betrays him. What's going on? And then 4 and 5 that we've looked at over the past couple of weeks is a back and forth. You have this, yes, I believe in the way that he has revealed in his word. He has instructed us in his law, and I delight in it. And at the same time, there's rebellion all around. There's promise, and it's disconnected and oftentimes leads to disillusionment. And as Marty said in the singing, these things are met by a response. We saw in chapter 5 last week, remember? That's last year. Maybe feels like a year, but last week. In Psalm 5, we had this focus in Psalm 3 and 4 that was on my trouble, and the promise, but my trouble, and that focus turned to a focus on the Lord. It's like a leaning in. I'm waiting on you. And then the perspective of the big picture came. Hey, look, he's in charge. He's sovereign, and he's over it all. It's like what's happened is that this prayer model or pattern, it's a descending bell curve. And right now, we've been nothing but descent. A bell curve usually has a bounce back, right? But we've been on nothing but descent. And as we look at chapter 6 today, Psalm 6 today, we're going to watch more struggle. You guys may be tired of struggle, but we're going to watch more struggle. And it's going to be a struggle in grief. And that grief is predominantly going to be seen in waiting. So listen, here's what the plan is for the remainder of the morning. We're going to actually dissect the prayer that is Psalm 6. And we're going to sprinkle throughout that dissection thinking about our present life. And at the very end, I just want to share a thing or two with us about waiting with grief. So Psalm 6, y'all ready? Here we go. We're going to look and dive into the psalm and then hopefully apply it to our hearts and lives and be encouraged, even in the hard things. So Psalm 6 is actually made up of 4 stanzas. Verses 1 through 3 is stanza 1, 4 through 5 is stanza 2, 6 through 7 is stanza 3, and then the last stanza is verses 8 through 10. And we're going to categorize those 4 stanzas this way. The first stanza is going to revolve around my question. Stanza number 2 is going to then go to my request. Stanza 3 will deal with my struggle. And the last stanza is going to wind up with my confidence. My question, my request, my struggle, and my confidence. Stanza number 1. You see in this, who is it that's addressed? It's clearly a prayer. Who is it that's addressed in verses 1, 2, and 3? It's the Lord. You'll see his name repeated 4 times in this stanza. And what's going to happen here is that there is going to be a crying out to him. There's 3 movements in this stanza. The first one is there's going to be a respect for the judge of all. Then along with that, there's going to be a crying out about the reality in me or for me. And then lastly, there's going to be a question for the sovereign. A respect for the judge, a crying out of reality in me, and a question of the sovereign. Look at those components. Respect for the judge. The way that the Psalms are written is Hebrew poetry. It doesn't do rhyming at the end of lines. It does parallelism. So you're going to watch there in verse number 1, look at what the psalmist says first in his prayer. Rebuke me not. And it's coupled with the next line, discipline me not. And in what regard is he asking God not to rebuke him or discipline him? Yeah, God, don't be angry with me. Don't come back, and that idea of rebuke is to correct me. Don't come back and correct me because you're mad with me. Instead, he moves from those two negative requests of the Lord, or statements to him, to two positive statements in the next verse, too. He says, be gracious, and it's paralleled with the idea of heal. So he is seeing the Lord as the one who is the judge. You see, and you know, and you ultimately correct and bring judgment. Please don't do that to me in your wrath. Instead, be gracious and heal me. But he moves from just respect for the judge to then a reality in himself. So it's almost like he's moving in, dipping his toe before he full on goes to say what his problem is. I know who you are, Lord, but this respect is seen with a reality in his own life. What does he say about himself in verse 2 and the first part of verse 3? He says, Lord, here's the deal. I am languishing. Not a word you use every day, but it's a beautiful word. It literally means to be sick or to be feeble. Another translation puts it, I am pining away. He then elaborates again with parallelism and says, my bones are troubled. That word troubled literally means to tremble inwardly. Have you ever felt like that? You're so shaken. It's not an outward, it's inward. And it's just, feel it. The word means to be disturbed or be dismayed. And he carries it even further. He says, my soul is greatly troubled. I'm not just a little bit trembling, I'm greatly trembling. And both of the terms where he uses, and it's a beautiful capture, the bones, which are the structure inside that holds me together. And then he says the soul, which is actually a word, nephesh, which is, it means your actual breath or throat. It's the very life source of who I am. Lord, and inside of me, every part of me is dying. I'm troubled. I'm in anguish. I'm dismayed. And I'm disillusioned. So he, out of that, asks a question at the end of verse 3. What is it? It's almost as if he's had to preface before he actually goes to ask this of the sovereign. His question of the sovereign is, but you, O Lord, how long? Literally, until when? Like, I'm in this, when will it come to an end? When will injustice's prevalence stop? When, and it's not just when will it stop, as if it's some inanimate outside of me, but when will you, O Lord, stop it? Again, it's an acknowledgement of He's sovereign. Incredibly important stuff here. Reality, your struggle meets respect. Your perceptions of what's going on in life and the visceral feeling, that gut level feeling, is expressed in this prayer with a mindfulness that God is the creator, that God is the ruler, that He is the judge of everything. When you come before the Lord in your struggle, maintain this tension. It's said like this in a book, and there's a couple of books I'm going to recommend to you at the end of the day, but it's said like this in a book called Dark Clouds and Deep Mercies. To cry is human, but lament is different. The practice of lament, the kind that is biblical, honest, and redemptive, is not natural for us, because lament is a prayer. It's a statement of faith. Lament is, and if you want to know what lament is, here's a definition. Lament is the honest cry of a hurting heart wrestling with the paradox of pain and the promise of God's goodness. I'll read that definition again, and maybe it's something we can just hold on to. Lament is the honest cry of a hurting heart, wrestling with the paradox of pain and the promise of God's goodness. This tension needs to be maintained. We must be honest with God. You know how when somebody comes to you that's a vague acquaintance and says, "How are you doing?" It can be the worst day ever, and how do you generally respond? "I'm good, fine, all's well." The sovereign already knows, and you're not fooling him. Be honest. But as you're honest, it doesn't mean you blitz God with the "you turned on me" and set yourself up as the sovereign. You need to remember who is the Lord. So here's the question that's going to bear on personal life for you and me out of this first stanza. What is my approach to God? Sounds simple. But is my approach to God humble, or is it demanding? Am I coming to God out of duty, I have to pray? Or am I coming to Him because out of dependence, I need you? Is the way in which I pray real, or is it just superficial? And underneath that question, is your disposition, is my disposition, is that I'm coming to you under you as sovereign, or am I coming to you, Lord, as I'm sovereign over? So what is your approach? What is my approach to God? Stanza number 2. We move from the question, how long, until when, to my request. Verse 4 is going to, again, this is verses 4 and 5. In this, there is still the address to whom? To the Lord, right? Now, it's only said one time here. He's already said it 4 times in the verses before. It's one time here, but it's a call to action from the Lord, the one who's sovereign. There's 3 verbs and 2 reasons given in this stanza. The 3 verbs, this is what the call to action on the behalf of the prayer to the sovereign is. Number 1, turn. Important word will be used later in the psalm. Turn. In other words, it literally means to return or to turn back. And it has the idea in this context, show favor. God, turn to me. But he's going to elaborate to give us full context. The second verb is deliver. That word deliver is from a primary root word that actually means to pull off or to strip. And by implication, it's telling us, I want you, Lord, please set me free. Remove the oppression. Remove the attacker. I'm thinking about, I think I just saw a news story where some guy, and why he put himself in this position, I do not know. But he ended up going down into some lake in South Carolina or somewhere like that, and an alligator actually got him. And if you've ever seen those shows, you know, the alligators do the little death roll thingy, and he's down there, and can you imagine him crying out, pull this off? Please remove this. Or if you want a lighter example, imagine a butterfly caught in a spider web. And all the butterfly needs is, would you please strip away this sticky substance and these threads that are holding me back? Set me free. Remove this. Verb number 4, and save me. That word is literally the idea of to be open, to be wide, to be free. It's opposed to the idea of I'm closed and I'm withdrawn. It actually carries the connotation of Lord, let me be safe. So turn back to me. Pull off the thing that's holding me down. Let me live with arms wide open, freedom, safety. Why, though? And this is crucial. The end of verse 5 gives us, or the end of verse 4 and verse 5 give us the why. Why, Lord, do you need to turn and deliver and save me? Here it is, number one reason. For the sake of your steadfast love. Wow. When we want deliverance, whose sake is it we usually want it for? Me. And he is declaring here, for the sake of your steadfast love. That word is an interesting word. It's hesed is the word in Hebrew. It means literally heavy. It carries the idea of a love that is unconditional and unmovable. Lord, for the testimony of your unmovable, unconditional covenant love towards me, deliver me. And then this last verse, which sometimes could be confusing perhaps, but it's really, it's fascinating. He's saying, for in death there's no remembrance of you, and note the parallelism, in Sheol who will give you praise. This is not annihilationism saying that once you die, it's all gone. You just go away. No, it's saying this word remembrance has the idea of to recall or to commemorate. And you can look at the parallel to it and the rest of that. It parallels it to praise. In other words, Lord, if you don't deliver me, the one who's under your steadfast love, then what are others going to say about your steadfast love? Deliver me so that I can actually give you praise. I can point out to your goodness. I can point others to your consistency and care. His request is real here. Please move, Lord. Come to me. Free me from the chains of oppression and make me safe. It leads us to another present life question. And that would be this. Why do I ask God to answer our request? Why? Are you just looking for wish-granting manipulation? You're my genie in a bottle, and God, if I tell you to do it, you've made a promise, so you have to do it, but it's me manipulating God? Or are you bringing your request with your real hardships and your real difficulties to God out of your relationship of love with Him and concern for His name's fame? Are you bringing your request, God, please answer my prayer, in order for you to have the opportunity, for me to have the opportunity to praise Him with my life, to recall all of the things that you've done for me to those who are coming along, my children and my grandchildren, so that they can hear about your goodness and what you've done and what you're like and what they can have? Why do we ask God to answer our requests? Stanza 3. Stanza 3 is my struggle. The addressee here is no longer the Lord. Who's the subject of this? It's an internal reflection. Do you see it? The word I is used 3 times. The word my is used 5 times. It's a monologue with self about the scenario that he's in. Stanzas 2 and 3 flesh out the tension of respect for the sovereign and the reality of my life's issues. This stanza, in 5 lines, is going to capture the fatigue that I feel and the grief that I have. Look at the fatigue in these verses 6 and 7. He says, I am I'm weary. The word literally is to gasp. Some of you ran in a race yesterday, and probably towards the end of the race, you were like, I'm exhausted. I've given everything I can. I've endured as long as I can. Can't go on. Weary. Verse 7 continues that. Instead of saying I, he uses my eyes. And you'll see why in a second. My eyes, he says, they waste away. They literally fail. They're consumed is the idea of that word. They not only waste away, it says they grow weak. And that growing weak literally means to become old. This fatigue is aging me. And specifically my sight. I can't see anymore. I can't see clearly. I'm tired. But this fatigue and this tiredness is actually coupled with the sense of grief. It's the image that comes to my mind immediately. When you think of grief, what do you usually do? When you're in grief, what's your first response? It's to cry. Some of you are tough guys. Maybe you never cry. But all tears are is the release of an emotion that's built up within. And here it specifically represents grief. He says, I have flooded, which means to make to swim, my bed. I have drenched, I have dissolved my couch with tears. You know, it's fascinating because both of these are reflections of the night again. And I don't know how many of you know people who've lost a spouse, especially if they've had a really good, close marriage. And they've lost that spouse, and they'll tell you that nighttime is the hardest time. It's easier for tears to come when you're alone, when you're distracted, when you're waiting for relief and that relief is not coming, when the place of intimacy with that other person feels lost. And I don't know, I know for you, but this goes a long time. And oftentimes you get to a point of where I'm not crying anymore. I'm cried out. I don't have any more tears to shed. You're exhausted from the burden that you've carried and from the hurt that you have fought for a long, long time. Listen, waiting is hard. And waiting is exhausting. So here's the present life question from this stanza. Have you or will you be honest with your struggle? David here becomes brutally honest with himself and does so in the context of prayer to God. Again, I'm not sure how you handle these kind of things, grief, hurt, and a long waiting period of it. Many people become calloused. Many people seek to try to keep a stiff upper lip, even a stiff upper lip before God. When down inside, you know you're mentally and emotionally and physically and even spiritually worn out. And not only that, sometimes he ends up at the last of that says, I'm growing old because of my foes. Do you actually acknowledge foes? I mean, sometimes those foes are external, no doubt. Many times those foes that you're battling are internal. This weariness, this exhaustion, primarily is an internal thing for David here. It's a discouragement. It's a struggle with sin. It's embarrassment, possibly. It's opposition that hurts you. And it's a sense of weakness, and I can't do anything about it. Be real before the Lord. Whatever that foe is, be it person or circumstance or internal struggle, because He knows anyway. Your honesty is not disbelief, as we read in that quote earlier. Your honesty is actually an affirmation that you trust and believe that He is the sovereign. And because you know that, you're just appealing to Him with what is real and what you can't control. You're asking Him to step in. Stanza number 4. This psalm ends with my confidence. It's a declaration of prayers heard. Now, who is it that he addresses here? He's not speaking to the Lord, although it's in the context of prayer, so it's for the Lord's hearing. But he's not speaking to the Lord. He's not even speaking to himself. Who is he declaring truth about his prayers being heard to? Who is it? It's workers of evil. It's whoever the foes are. You're going to see later in verse 10, it's the enemies. It's the persons who bring trouble or sorrow, particularly those who bring it via wickedness or a distortion of the way as prescribed by God in Psalm 1. What does the declaration tell these workers of evil, these enemies? What does it tell them? What's the verb? What's the command? Depart. Depart. It's to turn off. It's to be removed. It's going to be paralleled later down in verse 10 where it talks about they shall turn back. And interestingly enough, that turn back is the same word as turn, O Lord, to me. In the context in verse number 2 or 3, verse number 4 is Lord, turn to me with favor. Here the word's context is turn away from me in shame. Depart. Why can David, the psalmist, in his grief, look at the workers of evil who seem to be getting their way and say, depart, turn away? Why can he do that? What does the text tell you in verse 9? Actually, the end of verse 8 and verse 9. It says, the Lord. 3 times it's going to refer to the Lord here. It's a declaration to these workers of evil of that the Lord. And what is it that he's done? He has heard. What has he heard? In the first clip here, he's heard my weeping. Stanza 3. In the second statement, he's heard my plea. Stanza 2. And thirdly, he accepts my prayer. The thing I stated at the first, give ear to my word, O Lord, in stanza 1. This declaration sounds like it's finished, doesn't it? Like it's done. Note the time frame, though. What does he say about the enemies and their demise in verse 10? Is it past, present, or future? What is it? It's future, is it not? The confident assertion and directive to these workers of evil to depart is based in future tense. Enemies shall be ashamed. They shall be greatly troubled. Uses the same phrase he talked about his own soul at the first of the psalm. They shall turn back. How confident are you in your grief or your struggle or your weight that the Lord wins? Look, the psalmist moves all over the place, doesn't he? He first here in verse 2, what does he say he's doing? Man, I'm languishing. But he transitions by verses 8 and 9, the Lord's heard me. And they're continually moving. We've gone through Psalm 3, 4, 5, and now 6, and it's constantly back and forth between a confidence in who God is and what He's promised and that He will bring it to pass, and constantly questioning whether or not my story is being heard. It brings it to real life. David is the one who's the author of these Psalms, and it's in the midst of his own son sending out an army to assassinate him. We're going to end, before Marty comes up, I'm going to read a short excerpt that I think helps us to capture the idea of lamenting, and lamenting for a long time. It's again out of this book called Dark Clouds and Deep Mercies. Listen to what he says. He says, "Lament is the language of waiting for God's justice to be accomplished. Through the Psalms and Lamentations, we've learned that lament is the way we live with pain beyond belief and divine sovereignty beyond comprehension." Then he gives a great illustration. Revelation 6 records the heartfelt cry for justice by those who had been slain for the word of God and for the witness they had borne. Their lament should sound familiar. They cried out with a loud voice, "O sovereign Lord, holy and true, how long before you will judge and avenge our blood on those who dwell on the earth?" The answer to their complaint is the gift of a white robe symbolizing purity, and then a somber instruction. Then they were each given a white robe and told to rest a little longer, until the number of their fellow servants and their brothers should be complete, who were to be killed as they themselves had been. While the martyrs wait for God's purposes to unfold and for justice to be done, they lament. Divine resolution will come, and you see it later in Revelation. However, waiting, even resting, is part of the plan. Lament vocalizes a desire for justice that is unfulfilled. Personal life question from stanza 4. How much confidence does the Lord's promise make in your present pain? How much confidence does the Lord's promise bring to pass or make in your present pain? Revelation 21 says this: there's going to come a day, new heavens, new earth, and the dwelling place of God will be with men. And you know what that text says. You've probably heard it at a funeral or something like that. It says that at that point, he'll wipe away tears. There'll be no more death. There'll be no more mourning. There'll be no more crying. There'll be no more pain. For, he says, the former things, the things you're in right now, have passed away. You say, that's fine. That's way in the future. Well, let me read this text to you from 2 Corinthians chapter 4, where Paul's going to take this truth and apply it to your present life. 2 Corinthians 4, 16 through 18 says this: "So we do not lose heart. Though our outer self is wasting away, our inner self is being renewed day by day. For this light momentary affliction is preparing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison. As we look not to the things that are seen, but to the things that are unseen. For the things that are seen are transient. They're passing. But the things that are unseen are eternal." I think we can call out here, even so, come Lord Jesus. Yeah, at the culmination of time, we're praying, come Lord Jesus. But I think we can apply that prayer, even as John's intention in the Revelation is, to our hurting and longing and languishing and waiting hearts now. God help us to do so.